Welcome everybody to Constellations Conversations with me, Robert Rowland Smith, and Nicola Dunn. Hello, Nicola.
Hi, Robert. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Today we're going to be tackling the subject of the field. And I am keen to talk about this. I know you are too, but one of the reasons I'm keen to talk about it is there does seem to be a little bit of confusion over what it is. And understandably, because it's it's not the most obvious and straightforward thing anyway. But one of the confusions I come across among people who are new to constellations, or certainly new to training in constellations, is the difference between the field and the system. So I just want to, we can just sort of clear that one up quickly and then go into some of the complexities around the field. But in my understanding, and I think yours too, Nicola, the system refers essentially to the family system and all the people who have ever been part of it, some of whom will become represented in the constellation. It also includes people who are outside the system as well, or have been excluded in some way. And it can involve non-human elements that are significant, like religious faith, for example, could have a role in the system, for example, or money might have a role in the system. But generally speaking, we're talking about, I think, the family system, and that's different from the field, which we'll go on and talk about. Am I with you so far?
I would just add that it's the family system that is bonded genetically, and also those who are bonded by circumstance.
Yeah, very good.
By that I mean intense experiences, which we'll talk about another time.
Yeah, great. Okay, that's helpful. And maybe we'll come back to define system a bit more in another talk. So field is not system. My understanding of the field, and I'd be really interested to check against yours, is that in a constellation, representatives are able to represent people they've never met or have no conscious knowledge of. How is that possible? It's possible because they are somehow receiving data. They're somehow receiving information which they then represent or manifest or embody in some way. And if they're receiving that data, it must have come from somewhere. At least this is the assumption we make. Where the data comes from that people then represent is what we call the field. So the field is that resource, that reservoir, source of information about people and things, experiences, the past, that is not normally available to us in everyday life. So that's kind of my first salvo on this. Let me check if we're on the same page.
Yes, I mean, and I might add that just as we're speaking, these thoughts come, that the field, there seems to be layers or levels or dimensions within it, and they may be or may not be related to species, so that humans have a sense of a shared field.
Very good.
And the sense that perhaps dogs, cats, elephants have a different dimension which they're in connection with. And Rupert Sheldrake has done a lot of work on this through his morphic resonance, and he's an expert in that. But we're just dipping our toes in. But to say that if you have human consciousness, to some degree, you're in a shared field.
That opens up obviously a whole other dimension there about the relationship between humans and animals and so on. But okay, let's go with that, not go down that particular route at the moment. Okay.
I would add, sorry, for those who love animals, just to say, and there is maybe a greater dimension of field that holds every aspect of life. So well, I'm not separating in a way that is disconnecting. I'm just introducing layers.
Yeah, absolutely. And, several times I've constellated people's pets for them as well. And that's obviously, in that case, we really are in a shared field with those animals.
Exactly.
Okay. So you mentioned Rupert Sheldrake. The other person certainly I often think of in relation to this and get asked about is Carl Jung.
Yes.
Because people say, oh, So there's this field, it's a bit mysterious. It's a kind of hidden reservoir of human consciousness and memory that through constellations we're able to access. So, Robert, is that then the collective unconscious a la Carl Jung? Which I think is a perfectly good question. My answer to that is maybe it is. The problem talking about the field is that we can't get any direct evidence of it. We infer that there is a field from the fact that we have this representation in the constellation. We infer there must be a source from which that data is coming. We can't point at it, so in that respect, it's like dark energy or dark matter. As far as I'm no scientist, by the way, of course, but as far as I understand, nobody has actually been able to point at dark matter or dark energy and say, aha, there it is. They've run all the mathematical equations and said, the only way we can account for the universe is to infer this thing called dark energy or dark matter behind it. So it's not empirically true, but it's theoretically highly probable.
Yes. And at a more sort of, feet on the ground, urban kind of level, there are certain things that we know exist that we don't see, but we see the impact of. So if you think of wind.
Yeah, very good. I like that.
We have to draw wind, but we have a sensation of it. We see how it impacts the world around us. And so in that sense, we talk about a field, and for those of someone who is brand new to constellations, there is no grass in said field.
Exactly.
We're talking about, really, it's an expanse, and this is a little bit more the sort of theoretical part. It connects into constellations, ideas around conscience and different levels within conscience, and that we see the impact of conscience as it moves through the field, a little bit like wind.
I've never come across that analogy, and I think it's brilliant. It's so helpful to think of like that. So, yeah, thank you for that. Yes, it moves through, it has an impact, and that impact is visible. So the invisible becomes visible in some way, and that's how we can infer that there's a field. The field is just a metaphor. It's no grass, as you say. Although actually the word field in its metaphor and constellations, if it were to refer to something physical, it wouldn't be to a grassy field. It would be field more in the scientific sense, like an electromagnetic field or something like that. That's probably a bit more where the metaphorical placing lies, I think.
And for me, just in terms of a concept, I find it easier to imagine it as like the ocean. Having that vastness, having the tides being that we talk about, we would say something like opening up the field. What we're really talking about is connecting to something that's already there. And we might make a space for it through intention, through collective intention as we gather together. And somehow the field becomes more available to us. It's us that, we become more available to the field. And then, for example, when we finish a constellation, we retreat, and something about the visibility of the system that we've looked at also retreats, goes back to the individual who has brought it to us. So the ocean sort of works for me.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to come back to the Carl Jung thing too, but I sometimes have almost the opposite picture to you. I often have something, not the ocean, but something oceanic, perhaps. Freud talks about love as an oceanic feeling, so that's also perhaps relevant to this, since maybe another characteristic of the field is let's call it a bias towards love or bias towards the good. The field is, if it has characteristics beyond the metaphors of ocean or field, I would suggest it's benign rather than malign, in that it's making data available to us for a reason. It's not neutral. It's making data available to us so that we can use it for good. So,
yeah, that's a beautiful way of describing it.
Right. I mean, I think that's could be questioned. But anyway, my other picture is that it's not a reservoir at all. It's not a field. It's not an ocean. The field is actually never there except when we summon it. And in the moment it's summoned, it begins to exist. We were talking earlier about, how both of us tend to produce thoughts in the speaking of them. And I was saying, as a writer, my ideas come as I'm writing, not before I'm writing. And I think there may be something like that going on with the field. Like the invocation of the field is what summons it. It's not there waiting around thinking, for God's sake, I've got all this information, you stupid humans. If only you'd ask, like the oracle or something.
Yes.
It's not necessarily an oracle. It could be simply, like a genie or something, just like appear in the moment, respond to the invocation.
Yes, and you're saying almost responds in service. And it works, I mean, we experience the field as it works through us. And that's sort of very clear in Constellations. That's the part I think I see as almost tidal.
Mm.
That it's a movement through us, and that its movement is generally towards completeness.
Yeah.
And we live in a time currently of division. That the potential movement is to one of a oneness, really. So if you're spiritually inclined, you could probably move with those thoughts.
Well, how nice. And since this is making both of us a little bit poetic, I'll continue your tide metaphor, because if you think of the field as a tide coming in, what it does when it comes in is fill up all the little rock pools. And those rock pools are those hidden secrets and nooks and crannies in our lives and histories and unconscious and memories that have been hidden in some way. But the field just covers everything equally and allows everything to be touched by it, even things which are otherwise hidden. So it creates a kind of layer over everything. Anyway, that's just another metaphor. I want to come back to the Carl Jung analogy, because I do get asked this. So is the field collective unconscious? Now, I'm not an expert on Jung, but in my understanding, Jung does sort of talk about the collective unconscious as a reservoir of, and particularly a reservoir of archetypes, although other things as well, and that these are held universally. So, somewhat against Freud, he believes that there is a single unconscious, and we each have a bit of it. We've kind of snapped off a bit of it, but it's the same thing. And we are related to one another as human beings. Ultimately, we all descend from the same entities. And so it's not a surprise that we might share this collective unconscious with one another. And that, therefore, in the process of a constellation, for example, all we're doing is being put back into contact with the fact that we're not separate at all, that my mind is just part of the collective mind, and it's just becoming lit up with something from another part of the collective mind elsewhere. Like, think of Rupert Sheldrake, his son, Cosmo wrote this book about mushrooms and fungus and mycelium. It may be that we're more like, the individual mind is more like a mushroom, and there's this mycelium connecting us beneath the earth. And so the idea of a separate consciousness is a bit of a mistake or a fantasy.
Yes, and I think you see that in a constellation workshop, that people come, and I always say, we all have different feathers. We sit in a room, and people bring issues, constellations are formed, they're disbanded, people sit down. At the end of a constellating day, I think it's very often that people feel a shared sense of humanity. They have come with something which is challenging for their own life, and they realize that everybody sitting in that circle has something. And I think that's one of its gifts, is one that constellations are humbling because of that connection, but also that connection is able to reveal itself through this mysterious force that we're calling the field.
Mm.
It isn't about individual egos. It's about what connects us.
It's about what connects us. Yeah. And I would suggest nothing is ever lost. I think we mentioned this a couple of times, a couple of videos ago. Nothing is ever lost from the field. Everything is kept as a trace of everything, which actually makes me think of another way into the notion of a field, which I'm thinking of because of my background in philosophy, and that would be in Plato, where Plato essentially says, all knowledge is there for us all of the time. It's just a question of whether we've forgotten it or not. So he has this famous phrase that time is the moving image of eternity. In other words, time doesn't exist. It's just how we humans have adapted to being able to understand what's around us. So in fact, Kant, the German philosopher, sort of says something similar. Time probably doesn't exist at all. But we humans have to have time in order to break things down into a sequence and then understand it so we can get our heads around it. We'd be completely lost if we experience the world as it is, which is as one moment. So that process of temporal separation over time, is what allows us to understand. And you could say the field is that single moment. It's just a moment that contains everything, like the Big Bang or something. It's all knowledge is in it, and then we try and access it.
Yes, I love that idea that all knowledge is available to us, because particularly for people who may be really struggling.
Yeah.
And that often, in a way, we are living our lives within the field in that sense, so that as you go through your life, I think particularly if you often have a problem or something you're struggling with, people often like to go for a walk or whatever. But if you can open yourself to the idea that the solution or the next step might appear before you in some kind of way, through some kind of message or some kind of encounter, then you are, in a sense, to the best of your ability, tapping into that field as an individual. It's like the art of the question, isn't it? That a good question takes you a long way because it has an openness in it, and often it has a humbleness. It's an outstretched hand.
Yeah. And when you said, for people who are struggling, it made me think another characteristic then of the field is that it's an offer of redemption.
Yes, even though it doesn't have the concept of redemption, because it just is.
It just is.
We feel we've fallen away from it.
Yeah.
Away from what might guide us or keep us steady. We're definitely seeking redemption.
Yeah. Yeah. So exactly, in itself, the field may be neutral or agnostic, odorless. I was thinking that Auden poem. What's he say? Love is odorless or something. Anyway, but the field, probably has no characteristics or properties like that, but that we can, in human terms, find in it everything we need in order to heal, save ourselves, save other people, redeem ourselves, redeem them. We talked about forgiveness and forgetting recently, for those things too. So it's we experience it as an enormous opportunity, as kind of possibility in a way.
Yes, and that it's benign.
Yeah.
We can take what's on offer, or we can refuse.
Yeah.
As we often do when we repeat mistakes.
Well, exactly.
Or say, I can't believe this is happening again. Well, why not again? If you don't make a change that's different.
Yeah. What you said there reminded me of a very distressing constellation I ran many years ago, that involved a mother brought an issue about her child, who was a very distressed young woman who ended up taking her own life. And in the constellation, her representative was very distressed, and there was a representative also for the police who was, constantly getting into difficulty with the law. And I'm saying this because before we get too kind of dewy-eyed about the field, we should remember, although it is benign, it preserves terrible things in it as well as good things in it. It preserves trauma. It preserves crime. It preserves all the bad things that have happened, the hurt, hate, and so on. So we say it's benign in the sense that it's handing back to us everything that has been, good and bad, in order for us then to go with the inclination to restore things in some way. Not restore through an act of revenge or justice, but restore through an act of seeing. Like, we see this bad stuff, and seeing bad stuff for what it is good.
Yes, so you've discerned the difference. I think that the reservoir aspect is benign, but nothing is ever really hidden.
Yeah.
Isn't it? I think that when we were talking about forgiveness and forgetting, and when one has maybe done an action and hurt another person, even if that person doesn't know that you were the cause of the hurt or whatever, you know.
Mm.
So there's never really any hiding of the truth. Somewhere it is always known.
Yeah, it is always known. Yeah, and known without judgment. Yeah.
Yeah, but held for the sort of the second part of that.
Mm.
There's going to be some completeness around that event. So the event either remains open, incomplete, perhaps ready to be repeated in the individual's lifetime or the lifetime of their descendants or far-flung relatives. But there is a sense that it is a movement that is incomplete and that it will need to be completed for some sort of rest and peace to reign.
Mm. Yes, maybe that's the other quality then we should highlight. There is if there's movement which is invited or even prompted a little bit by the field, then it has energy of some kind. It's not inert.
Yes.
You know, or at least it delivers to us the opportunity to act, to have energy, to move in some way. Things don't remain still, you know.
Yes, because it's part of a life force.
Yeah.
And there is I don't know, sense of some kind of evolution or circles or cycles or I agree with you. Sometimes, we do a constellation and we sort of blithely talk about the field, quite casually.
Mm.
But really, I suppose in more simple terms, there is an atmosphere.
Mm.
Sometimes there is an atmosphere of something just held in space.
Yeah.
That there's a sense of a want to move, but that it's not possible.
Mm.
And so something needs to come out of those involved in this field space. So yes, I'm struggling to even articulate these experiences, but
Yeah.
being in a constellation, we've all had them.
Mm.
And it's atmospheric, and we attend to that.
It is atmospheric, and it can feel sometimes. I mean, sometimes it's light and frivolous. You and I have run constellations together where people have dissolved in laughter or, sexual innuendo. I mean, sometimes it's a hoot, a constellation. But sometimes, and often probably, there are those moments where it feels like it's completely timeless. You're just, as you say, just held almost like a sort of hologram in the middle of a room, in a space, and allowed to observe, look and listen, wait, anticipate perhaps a movement of some kind. But there are those moments of absolute stillness. Right? We can kind of hear a pin drop, and it's as if the people gathered in the room, in the circle as well as in the constellation itself, are at some kind of profound moment of ceremony.
Yes. And it has this capacity to convey impact. And we use it spatially. So we have that modality of language, a spatial language. But so we can set up anything spatially. And then we have a sense of impact. And a knowing that is beyond the kind of, conscious mind. But also, I think we might talk about this, about the responsibility of looking at something, experiencing something, and then what you do with it. Because you can never not have seen or felt that experience.
Yeah, right. And your word spatially there, it's so important. And we have the word constellations itself, slightly misleading, but it refers to a configuration.
Yes.
We are looking at a geography, spatial picture. And it makes me want to connect back to this thing about time. Human beings are caught up in time all the time, and even today now I'm looking at a stopwatch, to time our session. We've had 26 minutes, 19 seconds, 20 seconds, 21. We can't get off the time arrow. But I think that's one of the things Constellations does allow us to do, or at least to have the illusion of doing, which is to not be in time, but to be in space, and to reveal the fact that beneath the human temporal flow of life that we're all tumbling through all of the time, actually, there are some still pictures. There are some frozen moments and structures, crystals or patterns that remain and set, until we intervene or something moves later on. But it's not working at the same speed as life. The speed of the field is not the speed of life. Yes. It's kind of slower and kind of freezes things.
I mean, we may speak another time, do a conversation about time, because it's a different type of time, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And it has suspended, ponderous moments.
Yeah.
Which allow us to really feel the impact.
Yeah.
Of a choice or a disruption or disconnection, and see if we, in a sense, want to pay the price of that disconnection.
Yeah. One final thought, we should probably close shortly. The field seems to me to be always ready. Like whenever I mean, I've run better and worse constellations insofar as my skill as a constellator hasn't been consistent, and it's probably improved over time. It's still a long way to go, and so on. But the art of my constellating varies, but the field is always there. So constellation in that sense never fails. However, I would say one thing there, which is that it never fails on condition that when we summon it with respect. Because I have seen, not often, a few times, people just very casually, oh, let's do a constellation, you stand there, and it doesn't work. And there are more empirical reasons for that. Than the frame hasn't been set, it doesn't feel safe, and, all of those things that from your professional practice in psychotherapy, Nicola. But I do feel, the field needs a little bit of respect before it dances. You have to ask, with gratitude and honor and respect.
And I agree. Don't predict the constellation before you've set it up. So to come with an openness and a humbleness is actually important, both for the issue holder and the constellator.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, there's no space for a movement. There's no openness. You're looking for a confirmation. You've preset, pre-cooked something, and you can imagine in any other reservoir of knowledge that doesn't feel very respectful.
Exactly.
Get what you ask for, I suppose.
Yeah. Exactly. Probably a good moment to pause.
So wonderful to discuss this with you, Robert. Thank you everyone for listening, watching. If you could like, subscribe and share, that helps to keep us motivated. And if you'd like to contact Robert, you can find him from his website, robertrowlandsmith.com. And I'm available at nicoladunnconstellations.com. And we hope to see you in the field one day. Thank you.